Alright, hello again to anyone watching these Kaijudo videos. Today I have the recap discussion for the 4th Kaijudo Open that I held on the Rangers Dojo Discord group. Luckily enough, they let me host these tournaments, and I host them maybe every month or two or so, and they last maybe 2 or 3 weeks to play all the matches. So if you're interested in playing in any of these events, want to try out some open format, then feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll find a way to get you into the group. Yeah, this was another tournament. Unfortunately, we had K-Rick unable to play after he registered, submitted his deck and everything, but got really busy right as the thing started, wasn't able to play his first match, and then essentially dropped. So essentially we had another 7-round tournament with a bye, unfortunately. Maybe we would have tried a different format of play otherwise, but yeah, ended up with that, so we had a bye once again, but things went pretty smoothly for me. I went 3-0, didn't drop a game this time around, played Lightwater Fire Oath Dragons once again. So, yeah, my matches were pretty smooth. I mean, going 3-0, 6-0, things run well for me. So, I mean, round 1, I played against Raijinku, playing Light Dark Nature Kalima, and I just had some stuff go well for me that match, and just saw the right cards. Ended up taking that one pretty easily, dodging some pretty critical stuff. So round 2, I ended up playing against Dark Signer on Water, Fire, Nature, Regeneration, which unfortunately for him is just a tough matchup. Harold just runs. I mean, it's pretty hard for him to interact with. Light Oathsworn Call is a devastating shield blast in a lot of spots. It's just a pretty good matchup for me. Just due to his lack of interaction for a lot of stuff. And Swift Regeneration is a powerful card, but kind of hard to trump Dragon. So that matchup went well. And then in the finals, I played against Gareth on Mono Fire, and I mean that match can basically be summed up by. I mean, I had first shield Kyo game 1, which did a pretty good job buying me time, and then game 2, unfortunately for him, he had hit first shield Oathsworn Call, and I dropped a Lyra. So it wasn't the worst case for him where I dropped Herald and then landed Andromeda Awaken, but it was pretty bad. So yeah, my rounds went pretty smooth. I had a good tournament. Gareth playing Mono Fire Rush, very similar to the list that Andros played last time around, and I'll kind of go into all the lists after this. So yeah, Gareth Mono Fire Rush had a decent tournament. Played against, I believe, round 1 was against LED on Lightwater Nature Haven's Gate, as he called it, which is basically just a 40-card Panopter Haven deck. Gareth got that match 2-1. Then played against Andros, which Lightwater Nature Bugs just has a rough time with Rush, depending on the draws, and those ones definitely favored Gareth, and he took that match 2-0, and then, of course, lost to me in the finals. LED had a pretty good tournament as well. Both he and Andros essentially went 1-1. They both got the bye. Andros got the round 1 bye against K-Rick. LED got the round 2 bye, but other than that, I mean, they both had a solid win and then a loss to Gareth, which is why Gareth has the 2 tiebreak wins. He beat both of the other players that finished 2-1, so a pretty good tournament for him. So yeah, LED eventually got the 3rd round. He finished 2-1 after beating Dark Signer in the final round, and Andros finished 2-1 after beating Louis in the final round. I didn't watch all these matches, so I don't know the details this time around, but yeah, so Dark Signer, unfortunately, he had the strong start, Water, Fire, Nature, Regen. The deck he went 0-4 with last time he played it. I felt like it was a good chance he would do this after he won the last tournament. I felt like there was a pretty decent chance, actually, that once he'd sort of proved himself that he could win, he would revert back to try to do something with the regeneration. Changed a few cards, which I'll show, but unfortunately, he kind of got duped with I think he took a clean 2-0 win against Louis in the first round, and then unfortunately had some rough games the rest of the way. Against me, tough matchup. Against LED, I think he said he made some mistakes that cost him, but at the same time, he probably just had a deck disadvantage in that matchup where the way the draws were, the Shield Blast, he wasn't going to win those matches regardless of his mistakes. And then we had Louis playing Light Dark Nature Midrange. Very similar to some of the standard deck lists with a little bit of changes, which I'll show once again. And his tournament went maybe not the best. I think round 1, like I mentioned, took the 2-0 loss to Dark Signer. Round 2, he got the win against Raijinku, who was playing Light Dark Nature Kalima. grindy matchup for sure. Took that one 2-1, and then in the finals, of course, took the loss to Andros. And then Raijinku, of course, unfortunately for him, took the loss to me in round one, as I mentioned, and then took the loss to Louis round two. So finished 0-2, and then got the final round bye against K-Rick, who, of course, didn't play. So kind of a rough tournament for him, but kind of the matchups and stuff. Dragons, maybe not the best matchup for his build, and then, of course, Louis packing triple Underworld Stalker is going to be a bit of a problem for Kalima sometimes. So yeah, that's how it played out. Similar decks. I mean, when you look at the list of decks, Oath Dragons, I mean, the third tournament it's been played, finishing, I think, at 3-0'd. I mean, I played it twice, and Andros played it once, and every time it's won the tournament, which is pretty impressive. And then the only other Dragon entry was, I think Louis played a 4-Civ Dragons, and he went 2-1, and the only match he lost was to Andros, who was playing the Oath Dragons. So overall, Dragons has pretty ridiculous record in the tournaments that we've been hosting, and is pretty underplayed as well for how good it's been doing. But when we're playing these 7-8 man of tournaments, it makes sense that you can never have everything represented, and a lot of the decks people are wanting to try and test at the same time as win. So it makes sense that you see a diverse metagame pretty much every time. And then Monofire Rush, I think the second time it's been entered recently, and both times finishes pretty strong. And then a lot of Piercing decks, once again, I think continuing the pattern of Piercing doing well. If you want to do well in these events, if you play a Piercing deck, I don't think, it's been very rare that they perform worse than over 50-50, which is pretty impressive. So yeah, then you look at unfortunately also the second trend of these tournaments is just Terror Pit decks doing not that well. I don't know if it's maybe a problem with the builds of Terror Pit decks, but Andros has been keeping stats on a lot of the cards that see play, and unfortunately, just on a raw accumulation basis, Terror Pit just keeps accumulating negative points every tournament in terms of how the cards perform. I think the lowest rated cards are Terror Pit and Mesmerize, and basically all the Darkness staples, because unfortunately those decks just don't end up with winning records. So again, I don't really know if that's maybe a testament to the dark decks themselves, or maybe the problems with the cards themselves, or more so just like the decks that people are playing. But yeah. And conversely, of course, like, yeah, Piercing is on kind of the other end with like Piercing, Finbar, all that kind of stuff is just always performs pretty well. So yeah, so that's kind of the tournament. I guess I can obviously jump right into the deck list. So starting first, I guess maybe finish off with mine last. So first off, we have Raijinku playing Light Dark Nature Kalima. So his 52 card version, the last one he played was a Light Dark Splashing Water. This time around, he has a very small nature package. I think this list is actually very, very similar to the list that I think it was his first KMC top 8. I think he got second place with a list very similar. Also 52 cards. Also had a 5-card nature section. The only difference was it was 3 Necros and 2 Skak the Stinger instead of Johnny Darkseid. But yeah, so overall, I think aside from that, a lot of very minor changes. Like he's got Decays instead of Toxic Fog. He's got like an extra Devouring Smog. I think he swapped Gregoria's Fortress for Agarix, and obviously made room for some other new cards like Trox. But yeah, a lot of it's the same. I think he slimmed down the Chimera package a bit. I think the one he did well with at the KMC, he had 3 Scavenging, I think 3 Gloom Hollow and 3 Screeching, so it was a little bit more focused on landing Medusa. But yeah, overall, I mean, a lot of the kind of good stuff, darkness cards that you would kind of expect of a Kalima deck. But overall, I don't know. It felt like the deck was a little bit too heavy. I'm not really, personally, I don't really get I kind of get the nature package, but I don't really think it's worth including. I think it's just kind of a bit of air. Like, I'd rather just have a leaner deck. I don't think they add much. Like, individually, like, Necros is a fine card. I think it's pretty not great. Like, it adds a little bit, like, so I guess what I understand about the nature package is you're playing it to help like matchups like the slower controls, as just when you're playing these super grindy late games, you're eventually going to unlock nature, and Necros ends up being a very powerful card, especially now that you have Agrix too. You can make a lot of cool plays where against these Haven decks, you play this like grindy game where you're just it lets you just kind of outlast them and just present way more threats that they can deal with. Because if they manage to kill your Kalima, you just get it back. You can like summon Agrix, get back Necros to get back a Kalima to your hand. Like you just have so much grind game that you can kind of just outlast the control decks and grind through them, and it makes it really hard. And again, when you're playing this 5-card section, you'll be able to unlock the Necros to have it be just a great top deck in the late game. But my problem is like I think the list overall just gets a little too clunky. Like you just don't see your good cards often enough. I think this deck has problems even against like more refined Haven piles as well. You're just going to be at a disadvantage because like sure you add to your late game, but you just have no consistent early game that does things that really matter often enough, and then you get to the late game in a super disadvantaged position to where it doesn't really matter how good your deck is once it gets there, because it takes too long to gain traction. Like they're just gonna like maybe that's not always the case, but yeah, like in those control matchups, Kalima has like two ways it wins. Like the first is just like Kalima just they don't like they get to the late game pretty slow, and then you're just like mashing top end against each other, and Kalima just kind of trumps Haven sometimes. If they take too long to get to their Havens or all that kind of stuff, if they weren't able to reverberate, if they weren't able to get out a huge amount of advantage with like Reap and Sows and Logo Scans and Reverberates and discard spells, if they weren't able to get out ahead on the card advantage axis well enough, then like Kalima can do a pretty good job just trumping their top end, and then that puts them ahead. Or the other way Kalima does it is kind of that grind game I was talking about, where you just have all these Slayers that make it hard for your opponent to clear your board. You have like those Necros, Agrix stuff to just buy back everything, to play through a lot of you keep presenting threats, as I mentioned. You just become this like very resilient threat deck that makes it very hard for them to kind of control you, and then that also kind of buys you time for Kalima to take over. But this game, like Necros supports that second strategy with the threats, as I mentioned, but it just, again, like I think it just makes things pretty clunky in getting there, where you can just play a leaner deck, and maybe you worry about deck out at that point sometimes, but it just lets you execute both of those plans more consistently, I think. And I just have some issues with that kind of approach, where it's just too heavy, you have too much variety, and I think like I just think there's too much, like there's something to be said for having a bunch of different kinds of options, but there's also something to be said for just being able to do your best things more often. And I think when you look at Mono Dark and like the disparity in power level of certain kinds of cards, like I think you just want to draw your better cards. Like Johnny Darkseid is a very strong card, and I think the reason to play Nature in Kalima, but I don't think you can like support it like this. Like you're just maybe once in a while, I think it's like something like 15% of games or something, maybe even smaller. It's like a very minor chance that you actually have an on-curve Johnny Darkseid. And when you have it, it will be good, but I just don't think you want to play cards like that. Like just I just think there's just value to having like a more focused game plan. But regardless, I think there's like lots of good stuff in here. But I mean, I kind of felt like that's how it played out. Like I think Kalima should be one of Dragon's more tough matchups. Like the discard, Kalima is like at its best versus Dragon. Like of all the matchups, like it can be kind of iffy versus certain kinds of decks. But Dragons is one of the matchups where like you want Kalima against. Like that's one of the trump cards. It just, Dragons being this like very kind of clunky, expensive mid-range deck, like lots of high-cost cards. If they don't get out ahead with their bird synergies, like they're just going to be pretty slow and playing like one card a turn. And when you're doing that, when you're slow and playing one threat a turn, like that's where Kalima thrives, because you just drop Mark, and it's just huge blowout on mana. Or Kalima, huge blowout, very difficult for Light Water Fire to answer as well. So it should be one of the good matchups, but when you just don't see Mesmerize or your cheap removal to answer Nyx often enough, I think that can lead to issues. So yeah, I don't know. I just think I would like to maybe clean up the list a little bit, but overall, I mean, the deck is fun. I mean, maybe Underworld Stalker 2 should definitely be in here. Just it's part of that. Like when I was also talking about the kind of grind game versus like Haven with a lot of Slayers, like scavenging plus Necros and Aggrex, that's one thing, but you only have like the 2 Tar Gusher. I feel like maybe more Gushers, more, or some mix in some Underworld Stalkers, that kind of stuff. Like, I really don't like Ripper Reaper as a card personally. I think it's not really worth playing ever. Devouring Smog is pretty questionable too, although it kind of, if you need some kind of extra shield blast. Like, that's the problem when you go heavier on your deck, you kind of want to also make your ratios line up, because if you add more top end stuff, you add more, like if you add more top end stuff like all these Necros and Aggrex and other stuff, you still need to make sure you have enough shield blasts, which is why the deck gets to 52 cards, because you add a bunch of stuff and then you need to add more stuff to balance out your ratios. You need to add more cheap blockers so that you see them, and you just kind of dilute your stuff, because now you draw, instead of drawing your best late game cards, now you're drawing Necros. Instead of drawing your best early game cards, now you're drawing like your substitute early game cards, which is kind of my problem with that kind of approach. But regardless, I mean, yeah, another event where Klima maybe underperforms, or underwhelms a bit, but definitely room to improve for sure. Next up, we have Louis playing Light Dark Nature midrange. So this is kind of a classic Louis deck where he usually plays like 43 to 45 cards, and you can always expect a bunch of one of super rares that he wants to try, which is definitely his kind of thing. He plays these tournaments wanting to play test, try out new decks and ideas, and every time around there's like a few different one of super rares that he wants to give a shot. So this time he got like 1 Aggrex, 1 Sasha, 1 Behemoth, 1 Serpens, 1 Necros. Yeah, this deck pretty solid. I mean, very reminiscent of the standard list that we would kind of expect to see, the Light Dark Nature midrange. Pretty heavy on evolutions. Pretty heavy on just like card quality, right? Like powerful a lot of powerful 3-drops, 10 power or 11. Dang. 11 powerful 3-drop creatures, 2 Mesmerize as well. Maybe a little bit light on Shield Blast, like triple Arbiter, triple Root Trap. Maybe you want a bit more, but it's kind of hard to make room. And I think that's one of the problems with this deck, and probably why Louis maybe had trouble with Andros. Again, I didn't watch the games play out, but the deck is just a bit slow. Like, it's just playing powerful cards and then playing powerful evolutions. But in open format, it does feel a bit slow. Even against dragons, if you don't have your Blind Reveal Prime, like, I mean, it's not the worst. Like, you got a bunch of Hexproof stuff, but like Underworld Stalker, I think is just worse in open format. I think, yeah, the evolutions are powerful for sure, but I just think it ends up being just a little bit of a clunky deck. I think you could get a lot of mileage once again of just like leaning out the deck a bit. Of course, obviously for this event, Louis wants to test his one-ofs and see which ones are good and such, but I think like I would definitely just like axe this Necros. I think this card, once again, it's just like such a supplemental card. Like, it's good at like, I don't know, it's just not even good. Like, it's just it's always like an additive card where it like it's good when you've done good things. I don't know, it's hard to explain from my perspective. It's just like you tempo out like an extra 3,000 power creature. It kind of gives you like that that Dark Return type creature, but you don't really need those that often. I don't know. I just think it's just such a slow, clunky card, not really worth playing a multi-civ for it. In my experience, like, it's always been a card that's underwhelmed from my perspective. Yeah. So I would probably cut that card. I don't really like, I don't know. I think Behemoth is also, like, you have so many other powerful evolutions, but yeah. I'm not exactly sure. It depends what you want to beat as well. Like, maybe you can probably keep just 6 blasts if you're not as concerned about aggro, but you kind of should be concerned about aggro if you're playing this list, because you're definitely going to have a tough time with control. So you should be trying to have a good matchup against aggro at that end, and like, you should be aiming to be good against like tempo and aggro decks with this. So I'm not exactly sure what I would do. Like, I think Serpent's also kind of clunky and not that great in open format. It's good with the Aggrex and good on certain boards for sure. Certain matchups, it can be a really powerful card. But it's also, once again, it's just one of those like situational powerful cards that I don't think you need to have in your deck, really. So if you're looking to cut stuff, yeah. And then, but overall, I mean, the deck's pretty solid. I think, again, it's just maybe a little bit unfortunate matchup-wise, maybe. I'm not really sure exactly. Like, Had the win against Raijinku, obviously Underworld Stalker, pretty big in the Kalima matchup, but yeah, overall, I mean, it's this kind of approach in general. It's not that far off like the old school standard lists, and I think those are pretty just generically good decks. But yeah, maybe some stuff you could do to change things around, but overall, just a pretty solid deck. Yeah, but there's tons of options in terms of how you choose to build it. Next up, we have Dark Signer playing Water, Fire, Nature, Regeneration. So, like I mentioned earlier in the video, this was a list that Dark Signer played way back. He went, unfortunately, 0-4 with this list, similar list in the round robin event we did, but came back this time to try it out. Won the first round against Louis, which, I mean, kind of makes sense. I mean, Regeneration is just an excellent card against this kind of deck. Like, Louis just doesn't have many answers to it. A quick Regeneration especially. So, like, that card kind of thing can be pretty good. And then Tendril Grasp obviously just does a great job against this kind of slower, clunkier deck. So, I can definitely see how things would go right for him in that matchup. But overall, the list... yeah, what were the changes? So he basically went to Thought Collective instead of Logo Scan from last time, which I'm kind of a fan of. The card plays out pretty well. Lets you look for important cards, lets you find the bad apple. Being a Shield Blast, actually pretty relevant. Like, it's come up a lot for me where it's just really nice to have, actually. And just being faster than Memory. Like, you can't afford to be tapping out for Memory on turn 4, but you can't afford to go 2-drop and then Thought Collective turn 3. So that's why it kind of gets a nod there. But yeah, other than that, I think the only other change was cutting the third Root Trap for a third Blitz, which I think is necessary. When I've played these decks, I've always felt like you need 5, maybe 6 of these fire fast attacks. Like, I've always been between 3 Blitz, 2 Steam Tank, or maybe 3 and 3. 3 and 3 can be a bit clunky, as I've talked a lot about in the past, but I think you need a minimum like 3 Blitz. Or minimum 5 of these effects, because it's too rough if you never see one. And on top of that, the more you play, like, they can become live cards from hand, which can be pretty good in certain spots. Like, and then it also lets you hard cast them in the late game when you have a bunch of cards in hand and don't have a regeneration. Like, it's just better to have more of these effects. And I think 3 Blitz is mandatory pretty much. And so the deck plays out pretty well. It has some issues maybe with sealing, and I think that's, or just like not seeing the power cards. And I think that's one of the things like Dark Signer wants to address. And I know after the tournament he mentioned that just the 8, he just doesn't get that much out of the extra Shield Blast. Now, I think it does, they definitely do help. Like, I think this deck can have a pretty good matchup against like certain kinds of aggro decks, like the more linear rush style ones can be decent with like triple Tendril and Roots and Artichokes. And maybe, but I don't know. It's hard to say that like cutting 2 blasts really changes that much. I think you do. Like, he was mentioning playing Sprite's Gift, which is a card I'm a big fan of. So yeah, I think Sprite's Gift, pretty good card. It helps a little bit just finding the regens, because when you turbo through your deck, you're getting a bunch of mana off of Bad Apple and stuff like that. You just need to find the payoff, and Sprite's Gift being that payoff can definitely help. And if you're not going to move towards like the more high synergy, high power veggie stuff, then I would definitely like to have Sprite's Gift as that extra regeneration, extra Finbar, that kind of thing. And yeah, like I don't know, it's nice to have 8 blasts, it's nice to have 9 blasts even, but it's just so often like you're just sitting with these cards in hand and they don't do that much. Like, they're all kind of clunky. Like, Tendril Grasp is pretty good from hand a decent amount of the time. Root Trap can help answer stuff like Awaken, but a lot of the time, like, you're just losing those games anyways. Like, or like answering an Andromeda to get rid of Ostrike, but again, you're just not doing that well. You'd rather just like Finbar back the Andromeda and make a final last ditch effort or something like that. Obviously, you can't Finbar Awaken, but yeah, you just rely on like Swift Regeneration to beat an Awakened at that point. Like, I think the extra 2 blasts definitely makes sense to cut, just for more high impact cards. So, but yeah, overall, I mean, the tournament, once again, like, this deck, no matter how you build it, is just going to have a tough matchup against dragons. Like, the best thing to do would just be to play the veggie stuff if you want to be good against not even good. If you want to have a chance against dragons, like, Well, actually, maybe not. Maybe like you just try to play as lean of a build as possible and beat down, because like against dragons, like you can always go for like the Ninja Pumpkin like cornucopia setups. Like those can maybe get you there sometimes against dragons, where they make it hard for you to like actually do anything to their board. But overall, I mean, both like Veggies just has a hard time with this kind of the dragon deck, and so that matchup's just really tough unless you have like a great start into regeneration. And sometimes you can play through a Herald dropping even dragons off the top if you have enough of a board presence, but most of the time it's just a really tough matchup. And then the other match, I mean, went against LED's deck, which I'll cover soon, which just a huge blocker deck, basically just like Panopter, Haven. Like that deck is just going to be build a huge wall, hard to attack through. I think I played the matchup a little bit on, and it definitely felt pretty swingy. You really need to just like because LED's deck doesn't have a lot of ways to like actually interact with the board that much. It's basically just like turbo out a Haven attempt. Like in that matchup, it's kind of just like turboing out a Haven, and then it just like quickly kills you. But if you can just sometimes like this deck will just draw a ton of cards and be able to chain regenerations together, and you can just kind of play through even just like a Panopter kind of going off. Like you can build up enough of a board presence to kill, which definitely, yeah. But if you just break an early Hover Star or something like that, the matchup gets pretty bad. And from what I heard from Dark Signer's recollection, he did hit probably more Hover Stars than you should ever expect to in a match. But regardless, maybe some unfortunate luck, maybe an unfortunate matchup at the end there. Finishes 1-2, which is better than 0-4, but yeah, still not the best result, but kind of what the deck does, I guess. Next up, we have Andros playing Lightwater Nature Megabugs. So this build, pretty similar to the one Gareth played in the last event as well. It's actually funny. I think Andros and Gareth basically just switched decks. But yeah, so this time I think Andros ended up cutting Cyber Scamp and then changed a bit about the list. He cut, what did he change? He cut Cyber Scamp outright, so he has fewer 2-drops. He also trimmed Keeper of Laws and Finbar, and then added some extra 1-ofs with Sasha, and then also added a second Homunculon and 2 Salvation Reckoners, just for more Shield Blast count, which is pretty fine. Like Salvation Reckoner makes sense. It's like a card that you can hit off Hive Queen. It's just a solid Shield Blast as well. And yeah, adds to your light count, which definitely helps as well. So pretty solid list. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar to the last one that Gareth played. I think the water count ends up being a little low for my liking. I'd kind of like to see the third Finbar potentially. Yeah, because I mean, like the water count's acceptable, but like these, like Rusalka's just too important to have on turn 4, or Piercing's just too important to have on 4, that like I don't want to be whiffing. I'd rather have more water mana than just be like kind of right at the barrier of like what's acceptable. So one of the things I was thinking, I'm not the biggest fan of the Reckoners. Like I get that it's 2 more Shield Blasts, that can definitely help, but I don't think it's like that doesn't win you that many games. And even if you're cutting Scamp, I'd almost like to just like play 6 Rusalkas. Maybe that's a little bit too much, but like just 2 more Rusalkas, 2 more water mana. I think that could be nice. Maybe find room for the third Finbar too. Third Keeper of Laws maybe. But I don't know. I can understand trimming some of this stuff. But yeah, overall, I mean, all of these are like good cards that you would expect to see play in different numbers. So yeah, just a pretty reasonable build. Unfortunately, again, like he had the bye one round, beat Louis another round, and then played against a tough matchup in Garrus Mono Fire and lost that one. So not too much he could do, really. So just finished with a solid record overall. Next up, we have Haven's Gate, or Lightwater Nature Haven's Gate, I guess. So LED brought this deck pretty focused, just 40 cards, and just like Mark of Eternal Haven, Havens, and then just like a ton of blockers. And then pretty low on Shield Blast. Like he's just got 3 Hover Star, 2 Piercings, and then of course, I mean Sprout. But I mean Sprout can be a very good Shield Blast in certain situations, but it's not really like a stop and attack type Shield Blast, obviously. So I mean the deck performed pretty solid. I mean, once again he went 1-1 with the bye. Beat Darksteiner, as I've kind of mentioned, but actually lost to Gareth, which Gareth on Monofire Rush maybe feels a bit weird, but to be honest, I don't think the matchup's actually bad for Gareth. As weird as it looks to like look at a blocker deck and assume the matchup, like I think the assumption is just you look at like a turbo blocker, like a pile of blockers, and you would just assume like, oh yeah, this deck probably beats Rush, which I think is probably the right assumption like a decent amount of the time. But like that's just a heuristic, right? You have to actually look at the matchup in specific, and like yeah, because like the matchups aren't generalized like that. Like you have to look at the specific 40 cards against each other and actually figure out which one's favored in those specific lists of 40 cards. And I think Gareth was actually like at worst, like I think he's like 50-50. So I think it was actually not a great matchup for LED because I mean, like his deck doesn't actually have that much cheap, like it's a lot of slow blockers for one, right? Like lots of expensive stuff, and he doesn't have that many Shield Blasts, so he's not expected to see that many in a match, right? And like against Rush, just playing blockers, like you can still get tempoed out. Like Gareth's got 3 Comet Missile, he's got Torhelm and Conflagration, and these cards just like really do a great job answering blockers, obviously. So like even if you play turn 2 Strider, you can just get tempoed out by other cards, and you don't have enough Shield Blasts. Like you need blockers. If you have blockers and a pile of Shield Blasts, then yeah, your matchup against Rush is going to be excellent, because you just like blow, like if they spend mana and resources to like try to push through the blockers, and then you just blow them out with like a tempo swing from a powerful Shield Blast, then yeah, they're just going to lose. Like it's very hard to play through that. But when you don't have a lot of Shield Blasts, like you just don't have a way to catch up on tempo otherwise. So you're only hoping that their draw is bad and that you can build up a blocker wall, I guess. But I don't know. It just doesn't play out that way that often. Like Hover Star is a pretty powerful blast. If it comes up early, it's going to be good. But you just don't have it that often, realistically, like where it really matters. So I don't know. Like when I had this suspicion when I looked at the deck list that Gareth would actually be not that bad in the matchup, and then I play tested a little bit and found that was actually the case. Like I felt like his deck was actually just a favorite over LEDs, and yeah, so I don't know, maybe that's weird, but that was my kind of takeaway, and it kind of played out like that in the match. But like I said, like this kind of deck should probably be a favored versus Rush, and probably would be if you just changed a few cards. But with these exact lists, I felt like yeah, it just wasn't the case. But I don't know, it's hard to make changes, I guess. Like you have a lot of good stuff. I like that it's 40 cards, like just super lean, ramps up. Like it's a small nature section, probably too small for my liking, but at the same time, like what else are you going to add? Maybe like you just add root traps or artichokes or some nature shield blast, and that probably is good. And what do you cut? I don't know. Maybe you just cut like Guardian Rusalkas, or actually, well, the worst card in the deck is Replicator Drone. And I think when I watched the matches that Gareth played against LED, I think Replicator Drone is literally, you could just make this one card choice, just comparing it to Raincloud Kraken, this one card choice you could argue just lost him the match against Gareth outright, if you just swap it for Kraken. Now, like I said, maybe you prefer just not playing Replicator and playing, maybe it'd be better to have those Nature Blasts like I mentioned instead of Raincloud Kraken instead, but just Replicator alone was just, I mean, like I said, I can explain the situation. Like, I think it literally just lost him the game, because compare Replicator Drone to Raincloud Kraken, right? Replicator Drone, in like the good case, you have 2 in hand, in which case it just turns them into Raincloud Krakens, because you get to summon 2 for 4 mana. So they turn into Raincloud Krakens that have an extra 500 power. But is that extra 500 power worth playing a card that has none of the flexibility of Raincloud Kraken? Because there's no cost flexibility. Like, you have to pay 4 for this. And then, so you can only play them for 2 mana each if you have 4 mana, right? And that's the problem. Whereas like Rainclaw Kraken, you can play it on turn 2, you can play it on turn 3 alongside like a tap land, which this deck has a lot of, right? A lot of multi-civ mana, which is part of why like the clunkiness adds to the problems in the rush matchup. But this single card, like, it's just worse. Like, that 500 power is in no way worth losing the flexibility that Raincloud has in terms of cost. Because if you just have 2 Rainclouds in hand, you can just play them for 4 mana anyways. And like, you lose 1,000 total power, but how does that matter? Like, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, 3,500 is not that big of a deal, right? So, and like, the best case scenario is you have all 3, in which case even if you have all 3 every time, like, I don't even know if it's better than Raincloud, because like, you're discounting them to like 1.3 mana or whatever, which is like good, I guess, but, and it's like a pretty big swing. But even then, like, it not being able to play it on turn 2, and that's literally what happened. Like, in the matchup, I watched those games, and LED did not have a turn 2 blocker play in 2 out of the 3 games against Gareth. Game 1, he didn't have a turn 2 blocker play and lost. Game 2, he had a turn 2 blocker play and won. Game 3, he did not have a turn 2 blocker play and lost. And what card was sitting in his hand in both of those games he didn't have a turn 2 blocker play? It was Replicator Drone. If it was just Raincloud Kraken, he has a turn 2 blocker play, and like, it completely changes the game. But yes, I mean, I think it's kind of indefensible as a card choice. Like, I think this card is just, I mean, for good reason. It's just not a good card, and it's just worse. Like I said, the good case, it's just worse than Rainclaw Kraken. So there's like no way in my mind you could ever play this card over something like Rainclaw Kraken. So yeah, I mean, that card choice alone could swing the matchup to where Gareth isn't a favorite. But once again, like, looking at the matchups, I think Gareth ended up being a favorite. So yeah, I mean, I think, again, I like the overall idea, just like super focused. Mark of Eternal Haven being like a 2 mana ramp spell essentially, which, I mean, you could argue is actually better than just like Mana Storm at that point. Like, you could just play Mana Storm, and well, it is, because it lets you play the ramps. Well, maybe not necessarily. Like, it lets you play the ramp spell in the same turn as Haven, which is really powerful. But the difference is it's like more expensive, and you have to ramp into it rather than like using Mana Storm. And then Mana Storm has like flexibility, or Verdant Helix even, for that matter. Like, those cards have the flexibility in that like you can Verdant Helix into things that aren't just Eternal Haven, right? Whereas in this deck, like, you're not really there's not really a way to take advantage of the mark effect that well. So yeah, this card, yeah, so I mean, I like the overall approach. Like, Jazuri as a 1-of is pretty powerful. Like, that card's very good in the rush matchup, obviously, but with only one of them, you don't really see it. So yeah, like, Hoverstar, pretty powerful as well. Like, definitely works very well with Haven. So yeah, I mean, I would just be looking for maybe a few more Shield Blasts, maybe tone down. Well, it's hard to tone down the multi-civ mana since they're all good cards and cards you'd want to play, I guess. But yeah, I think there would just be a little bit of areas I'd look to improve. But overall, just a pretty focused linear deck, and maybe a little bit rough in the match. Like, well, not even rough. Like, just, I'm not sure. Like, maybe I feel like it would be, like, obviously he's good against Darksigner. I feel like he'd probably be decent against, well, maybe not even, kind of for the same reasons. Like, the deck has trouble against Gareth. Like, it's a bit slower, so maybe he can land Haven more often against this kind of Mega Bug list. But yeah, I don't know. I could see some problems in that matchup. The Slayers here could give problems, but at the same time, having no out to like a Haven that just sits back and then just kills them in one turn, like, that could be, with Hoverstar and stuff, like, that could be a problem. So yeah, I feel like his decks are like just pretty focused and strong. It's a bit maybe gimmicky for my liking. Like, I don't love the Panopter style, but it is kind of powerful. Can do some good stuff. Like, against my Dragon list, even like when I cut down to just like one Storm Spark, like, I actually have a hard time breaking through those blocker boards. So like, if Dragons aren't playing like a bunch of Storm Sparks and Cassiopeias and stuff, then like, it's even good there. But I definitely would sense some problems against like actual pile controls and stuff that have discard and stuff, ways to kill Panopter, plus like their own Havens and Andromedas and stuff. So, but overall, like, a pretty focused ramp deck with a bunch of card advantage stuff, but has some issues with clunkiness. And again, I think the only really bad card choice in my opinion is Replicator Patrol, but that could easily just be swapped for like Shield Blast or Nature Shield Blast, more likely just for the extra mana probably, or if not that, then just some other stuff. But yeah, overall pretty solid deck, and he had a pretty decent showing with it. Next up we have Gareth playing Mono Fire. So this list very similar to the one Andros played in the last tournament. I think the only difference is taking out well, first off, just playing 3 Storm Sparks over the Mono Fire Drakon guy that gets fast attack. I like having just like some Shield Blast that kind of messes up the math on your opponent. Like they don't just get a freely attack at the same time, or they have to attack when they don't want to try to play around Storm Spark. So I think the card just adds a dimension to the deck that is kind of needed. At the same time, it's a bit bricky, but another subtle thing that it does is like it increases the average card cost in your deck, so makes Blade Spawn like slightly better, but that's kind of minor. But especially because the card you're cutting is like already a 4-drop, which is already higher than the average, like a pretty respectably high cost card, I guess. Maybe not actually, but regardless. So that swap was made, and then cutting the 2 Ashen Tributes as well, I believe, for cutting the 2 Ashen Tributes and another 2-drop, I think. That sounds like what I did. Or that sounds like what was done, and then obviously I eventually had to convince Gareth to play Morkaz, which is a bit of a meme pick. So basically, or what am I saying? Yeah. We cut 2 Ashen Tributes for the Morkaz, and then just cut the Sledge Bot for, I think, maybe something else. I don't even know. Weird. Or no, it was whatever. Now I'm lost in the sauce. So yeah, essentially, basically, just Morkaz was kind of a pick because, well, I wanted Gareth to try it because I felt like there could be a decent number of Grudge Weaver decks. So like leading up to the event, Gareth and I usually play like a few matches just with a deck that he wants to pick. Like usually Gareth will tell me like, oh yeah, I kind of want to play this deck, and then I sit down with him and we like play a few matches with the deck, and then I ask him about like what kind of card choices. Like I give him a list of cards he can potentially play if he wants to tune the deck list at all, and then he kind of just like submits, and it usually takes Gareth like 20 minutes to just like sit down, finalize his deck list or whatever. But this time around, like I almost like, I don't want to say forced, but I definitely coerced him into playing Morkaz, because like I played like a Kalima deck with a bunch of Grid Weavers, and then I don't know, it was kind of suspect. So, but yeah, I mean the card is not really that good. The idea once again is like, if you expect a bunch of Darkness decks, usually one of the ways they try to attack Rush is playing a bunch of Grudge Weavers and stuff, and this card gives you a way to kind of answer that in a very profitable way, but it is kind of a meme pick at the same time, which was part of the thought process behind it, was just that meme pick. And once again, it does make your clashes better, but overall, not really a good, not really that good of a card. So yeah, probably should not be played unless you expect like a pile of Grudge Weaver decks, and even then, like maybe just don't play Rush, or maybe don't play, just don't even play it anyways, just do better things. But I mean, it was a funny moment. I think after Gareth's matchup against Andros, Gareth like messaged me that like it was just Morkaz praise because he won a clash with it. So I don't know, it's kind of funny, but mostly just dead card. So yeah, never went off in the tournament, obviously, because we ended up having just one Grudge Weaver deck, which kind of unfortunate. One Grudge Weaver deck that I beat in round 1, so Gareth never played against it. We did have 2 technically, but K-Rick eventually wasn't able to play the event, so that was the second Grudge Weaver deck, so never got to see Morkaz go off. But overall, like I think these 2 slots, you could definitely play like 3rd Sledge Bot. You could play like the 1 Ashen Tribute, which I think were like the cards. I think Magma Cannon Renegade is like an idea, just as like a kind of laser arm style card, just for a little bit of like explosiveness. You could also play just like an extra 2-drop, like a Shredmobile. You could play like maybe a 1 of Arbiter or Sunbolt Field is like an extra Storm Spark type effect. Um, yeah, there's some options for sure. So, yeah, those are some of the things you could do. But overall, just similar to the deck lists that have been played in previous events. And Gareth had a pretty good showing. I mean, his round one, I kind of went in depth. Like, he just had a pretty good matchup, or not a good matchup, but won the die roll. Torhelm was just incredible against LED's deck, and Gareth drew a lot of turn Torhelms. I think there's one game where Gareth like won the game just like sitting on turn 2, like 2 mana the whole time because he had like double Torhelm going and was doing some crazy stuff. But yeah, so that matchup went pretty well for him. Obviously, Andros' deck just has a tough time against Rush, and I think that was another matchup where Gareth just drew well, had Blaze Belcher, I think both games or something, and yeah, went pretty smoothly. There was really nothing that Andros could do in either game. I think he played perfectly fine. There was just literally, just kind of lost to the cards that were drawn essentially by both players. And then round 3, obviously, had the unlucky breaks against me as I hit Nice Shield Blast, but yeah. So good performance from Gareth, and the list's pretty standard, I guess. Finally, we have myself playing Lightwater Fire Oath Dragons. So this list a bit weird, I guess. I tried some different stuff out. I was testing a lot of different things, or a lot of different one of card choices and stuff. I really like Crystal Memory, playing that as like 1 to 2 copies. Like having a few more copies of Logo Scan. I was trying a bunch of weird stuff. Like 1 of Reverberate, which I ended up not really liking at all. So yeah, I kind of went to this eventually, and some of the weird stuff, like no General Sky Crusher, I think is kind of maybe bad. Like, I think the card is really good in like the Dragon Mirror. It's really good against like maybe slower tempo decks and stuff. It's just like a pretty powerful threat, but I think it's like a bit slow, and I just opted for like more Twin Cannon Sky Terror, just because like, I don't know, my thinking was like, sure, it's not like a powerful individual threat, but it just gives you like another kind of build your own Magris type card where you can just like curve it off of a Nyx to get value in like slower matchups. Just helps you go wide and get like a Magris that you can play on like turn 4 is maybe better than like some big dirtily threat like Sky Crusher, which may or may not come down by the time they've interacted with your birds, and is a bit just kind of slow, right? So like just the Twin Cannon just plays a little bit better with like the birds. It plays better with like Finbar and that kind of plan, I guess. And on top of that, I just feel like it's pretty necessary for combating, like, I don't know, like the powerful attack is so important when you're trying to push through Heralds, especially with Oathsworn Call, because like dragons can be slow and clunky, right? And that's why you need the jump jets. That's why you need the Oathsworn Call to kind of make up for that, so you don't get tempoed out. But especially with like Gauntlet meta and like all the evolutions that have come out, like you really need. It becomes a lot harder to like capitalize on Herald in a lot of matchups, and you really need to be able to do that in a timely fashion, right? Like to be able to punish a Blinder Beetle Prime, to be able to punish like a Charging Great Claw, or even like stuff like Torhelm and Conflagration. Like you really need to be able to get off your Herald effects to be able to do anything that matters in those matchups. And I feel like oftentimes General Sky Crusher is just too slow for that. You don't have the time to get there, so you just kind of need the cheap card in Twin Cannon, which is, or I keep calling it Sky Terror, but it's Maelstrom. But yeah, the Twin Cannon Maelstrom is just the card you need for that kind of thing, in my opinion. But it can be, it's like just face value, it's a pretty underwhelming card. That said, though, it's like still pretty good against certain aggro strategies because it lets your birds attack over stuff too, like comes up against Rush for sure. But yeah, so overall, I mean, the build pretty similar to the last few I've played. I like the 1 jump jets. It just comes up well, like if you don't have Oathsworn Call, but you don't want to draw too many of those effects. Double Coral, very solid card. You could say Coral can be played around, but it's easier said than done. Like your opponent has to break your shields to win the game, right? And oftentimes, like dragons as a kind of deck, like they just need that one extra turn to be able to land their combos or land their synergy plays and stuff. And that's all. Like a lot of the time, that's all you really need. Like if you can do enough interacting to slow them down, then that one O-Storm call can just like completely flip the game. So it's like it's a lot easier said than done to play around it. Like they have to break the shields at some point, and yeah, and when they do, it's going to be pretty devastating a lot of the time. I don't know. Like some of the stuff I'm not really sure on. Like I really not like I would like more Storm Spark type effects. I think that's something I noticed. Like you really do need those for certain matchups. Like even control. I've definitely been kind of getting by. Yeah, definitely kind of like I've been pile control. Like true pile control hasn't really been played that much in our events, so I haven't really teched for it. Like instead, I'm opting for more stuff like logo scan, like extra copies, of that kind of stuff. Just card draw stuff, and then just like playing like just relying on Herald, because a lot of the decks that are being played are like these like really mid-rangey kind of style, like Raijinku's Kalima deck, stuff like that, or like the Kairik decks, the decks that Kairik's been playing in the last few events as well, which are like more creature-based control decks that have a pretty bad, or not bad, but like a much worse like just generic game plan with like in terms of like interaction and ramp and card advantage. Like they're much more focused on just like defensive creatures and stuff, like, and shield blasts, which, so I don't know, my builds are maybe a bit greedy in that they're really skimping on stuff to combat like true Haven piles and stuff like that, and like proper controls. So maybe my lists aren't that great, but I think they've been pretty decently tuned for like the metas that we've had, at least. Like, and overall, like it's tough to find space. Like I think leading up to the tournament, I was really debating like which card choices exactly. I didn't know if I wanted like third Finbar or like third Keeper of Laws, or what else, like second Storm Spark, maybe a Cassiopeia, which is really good against pile stuff as well for the late game. But I don't know, it's always tough for me to decide the last few slots with dragons. But I still feel like Oath has been like a good choice for the meta games that we've had. Because again, like you're not really getting punished for it often enough against like the types of controls and mid ranges that people have been playing. So I think you can get away with that card choice, and it's just such an important blowout card against a lot of like the tempo decks that can otherwise be kind of troublesome sometimes. So I've been liking that. The other thing I tried was like triple Awaken, double Andromeda, which I don't know. Like I found Awaken to be pretty good, and once again, like I did expect like the kind of Kalima stuff, and the and once again, like with those kinds of decks in mind, I just wanted like that extra powerful threat card in Awakened, which definitely was relevant in my first match against Raijinku. I was able to land a bunch of Awakens, and yeah, it was just really hard for him to deal with. So I don't know, I like that as extra threat, the extra fire mana, but Andromeda is really important, obviously, like just so much better at stabilizing. So luckily I wasn't really punished for it, but like for example, Darksigner in the matchup against Darksigner Water Fire Nature Regen, this is a matchup where Andromeda is so important, and cutting a third copy of Andromeda for Awaken could have definitely come back to bite me in that matchup. But like I said, luckily I wasn't really punished for it. I think it's probably the wrong way to go. I think, like I said, I think Cassiopeia is definitely a card to look at if you're concerned with more of the Haven stuff, but overall pretty solid. And my tournament, again, like I mentioned, went pretty smooth. My games against Gareth, like I said, mostly summed up with like a first shield blast in both games. Game one was a bit kind of suspect. I think Gareth kind of like brain farted a turn or two, or one of the turns, and just like didn't attack or something. But it could have been close, but I think he just kind of messed up one of his attack plays, and he was playing a bit sloppy. But regardless, like that matchup, like the shield blasts are a bit too hard to overcome from that aspect. Otherwise, it can be a pretty tough matchup depending on the draws. But yeah, and then my second match against Darksigner, like I mentioned as well, I think the games can feel kind of close, but like just that one Herald turn just completely swings it a lot of the time. And like I think, yeah, one of the games I just had the timely jump jets. Another game I just had a great draw. with like a bunch of just good stuff, and then just did my dragon thing basically. But yeah, so I mean that matchup's just very tough for Darksigner's deck. Round one was pretty interesting actually. I was really not confident in how to play this matchup. Like it feels kind of tricky, and it, like I mentioned a while before, I feel like Kalima is pretty good against dragons, or it should be good against dragons. Like Mark of Kalima are both insane cards, and you're kind of on a clock to get under them, but at the same time, like if you, it's just like really hard to go wide if you don't draw like a million birds and then just like go unchecked, where you just like generate a ton of advantage and just make a huge board. Then like usually if you try to go in too early, it gets really awkward where like they usually have just enough to like clear creatures to where like they can buy time, and then 8 mana is not that hard to get to. Like the tempo Finbar draws just like felt like they were a bit awkward to line up properly, and they didn't always pay off, especially if you were just like going in just like for marginal value, or like just chipping in for a couple shields at a time. Like it would be too easy for them to like just flip the script and then just Mark of Kalima into Kalima. Like you just, if you break too many shields, you just let them assemble that combo, and then they just completely blow out your board if you don't get ahead. And it just felt like the minority. Like those games could definitely come up where you have like the go wide, Finbar, tons of birds, dragons, all that sort of stuff. Like those games can come up because, like, I mean, Raijinku's deck is a little bit low on interaction or just the ability to see it, but still he has like 5 powerful three mana plays, Mesmerize and Decay. He's got a bunch of powerful 4 mana plays like Screeching to kill Lux. He's got Spiral Puppet and Bone Blades. Like he's got enough disruption to where it can get kind of awkward to get out ahead. Like those, like it's just, I mean, dragons can be kind of fragile, right? So just that interactive piece to buy enough time, and then you can play Mark, and then Kalima can usually do a good job cleaning up the board, especially again because if you go in for shields, if you hit a Terror Pit or like even just like a Bone Blades, or like that'll clear your creature, and then the Mark Kalima will just obliterate your board, because like they just, it's hard for dragons to go too wide through a piece of interaction or two, because they just kill your bird, discard your bird or whatever, and then you're just clunkily putting out one thing a turn. Then you go for Finbar, you hit a Shield Blast, and then they mark you and you lose your board. They don't even need the Kalima that often, right? And then from there, you've given them too many extra cards, and now they stabilize and win. And so I felt like that happens quite a lot, to be honest. And so the matchup felt kind of tricky to play. So I don't know. I decided to kind of like play things weird, go second, and just play a slow game and capitalize on the fact that like Raijinku's deck, once again, kind of clunky, has a hard time actually seeing like the Marks and Kalimas in combination a lot. So I would just like try to sit back, and it, like the thing is, if he goes first, like if he wants to hard cast a Kalima on turn 10, like he would have to, like he only gets to play 4 cards the whole game, right? Like, or maybe even 3 cards, I think, I don't know. He gets to play like 3 cards before the Kalima, because he has to like draw charge, pass. No, that's not right. Whatever. Regardless, like 3, I forget exactly, but he only has so many cards he can play because he has no natural card advantage, right? Or hand advantage. Like he's got card advantage like Spiral Puppet, but he has no actual like hand advantage. So if I just like draw pass a bunch and just like build up a board to try to one-shot him, then I just like play the odds, and like the odds are in my favor that he just like doesn't have, he like might not even see Kalima by then. I can usually build up enough of an advantage, and then it's just hard for him to like do anything that matters, because he only gets to play so many cards if he wants to actually be able to hard cast Kalima. So I don't know. Maybe it's a high risk, but I think going in, it kind of depends. Like if you have the opportunity to go super wide and just like unchecked advantage and then go for Finbar, then like obviously you do that. But I guess what I was more game planning for was the fact that like just like playing like a Herald and then playing a Finbar and poking for a shield to draw a card. Like I just felt like those kinds of exchanges were just like really bad for me. So it would be better to just like, if you don't have the crazy hands, then you just like play slow and just count on your deck to just have more natural card advantage and to be able to play through everything. So it maybe felt a bit awkward, but like I think, I don't know, like I don't want to be too disrespectful, but I feel like my own Kalima lists and stuff, like they're a bit more tricky. Like dragons kind of has to go in more so, just because like the list of Kalima that I play usually are just like way more consistent at getting out the Kalima and just like ramping into it. Like Dark Nature Kalima, for example, like you just really consistently Dark Seed into Mark and Kalima and stuff, and like it's like just a pretty bad matchup for Dragons. Whereas like this list, I think I'm good enough just like playing the percentages, and it ends up being a pretty good matchup for me. Where it should probably be bad if it's built a little different, but regardless, yeah. So that was kind of my approach, and like game one, I think basically I think Raijinku had some pretty good discard stuff. Like he had some early interaction that was able to do some damage, but I think there was like basically one critical misplay that he made where he didn't charge Necros. So essentially like the game played out pretty long. And he got all the way up to his 10 mana or whatever, but the thing is like on turn 9, he had the option to charge either Necros or Necros or his on his 9 mana turn he had the option to either charge Necros or charge Skeeter Swarmer. And he chose to charge Skeeter Swarmer which left him with no cards except for his dual civ. And then on the next turn, which should be his 10 mana turn, he top decked Kalima but couldn't play it because he had kept the Necros. So he basically, and then I just killed him on the next turn. When if he had been able to resolve the Kalima, then it completely changes the game. So I think that was a pretty big mistake from his part. And I don't know. To be honest, he probably should have charged the Necros way earlier in the game. And I think if he charged it way earlier, it would have actually completely changed things. Because if he charged the Necros, then he had a Bone Blades that he could have cast. And then that could have killed a Nyx. But because he didn't kill that Nyx stayed in play basically the whole game. And I drew like 4 or 5 cards off of it or something. Like maybe that's a bit overstatement. I maybe drew like 3 or 4 cards off of it throughout the whole game. And if he had just charged the Necros earlier, he would have been able to kill that Nyx. Completely change things. And if not then he could have charged it literally every turn prior would have been the right play, but he held it all the way to the final turn and wasn't able to cast Kalima. So that kind of cost him the first game, which I think the first game ended up being kind of weird where he hit like the 15%er that he was actually able to cast like a Johnny Darkseid. So he just had like way more mana than he probably should have on average. So he had the pretty nuts hand, had some stuff going for him. So yeah, but then that one play at the end kind of made things pretty awkward. So game 2 was a lot cleaner for me. I think he just didn't really see anything that important. I just drew I drew pretty well. Like I had like double logo scan. I just did a bunch of stuff basically, like got out ahead of him and built up a board. He kind of I think he trocs me or at some point, but I just kind of just built up a pretty big board that he couldn't really deal with, and then just went in and killed him in one turn. So yeah, both games kind of played out similarly. Like I played the passive game, just built up a board, accumulated a bunch of advantage. Like again, game 1 maybe should have been a win for him, like because he had what he needed, right? He had like Johnny Darkseid into Mark of Kalima, which set me back a lot. And then he even top decked Kalima on the critical turn after I had rebuilt, but he wasn't, because he made a bad mana decision, he wasn't able to cast it. If he cast it, he probably wins the game. So game 1, he kind of had his deck kind of gave him everything he needed, but he kind of made that one mistake. Game 2 was a lot more of just like things went pretty well for me. Like I had the card advantage, built up a board, and then like his deck was just a little too slow. Didn't see the cards he needed, and then I just kind of just played out some Awakens, and Finbard bounced, and then just killed him in one turn. So kind of interesting. Things kind of went to plan in that matchup. So yeah, overall just pretty smooth tournament for myself. But yeah, it was another nice event. So there you have it. That was the 4th Kaijudo Open. So once again, if you're interested, just let me know in the comments below. But yeah, thanks to everyone for watching these videos, keeping up with the deck list and everything. So thanks as always, and we'll see you in the next ones. Bye.